Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the Improvisational Storytelling Podcast, where every week a few friends get together with their randomly designed, randomly created, randomly imagined, inspired by books and movies and TV shows and imaginations, but we all come up with separate ideas and combine them together to make a story that you can listen to on a cold winter night. I'm, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to tell you a story. What story elements did you guys have?
I have random insert.
Perfect.
I have history.
I have hero. So should history go first, maybe, I guess?
Sure.
Let's hear it.
So, in the history, it is kind of goes back a ways where the society had brought itself to start becoming more and more technologically advanced and more things going on. And a lot of things started turning into wow, that sounds really great. That would be good. But as the long-term effects of some of the things started to play out, more and more people were kind of disgruntled at the direction that it was being taken.
What was being taken? So far you...
Just technology.
Okay, technology.
And stuff. Okay, so basically it'd be like we're in a timeline much like our own. And people, like studies and stuff come out and show that like especially children's brains do not take... like it's bad. Their skulls aren't thick enough to accept all the radiation that gets thrown at them by having a screen right in front of them all the time.
Oh yeah.
Or just in general, where like, oh, I can contact someone on the other side of the world. That's great, but then it makes you, in some cases, very disconnected from those that are around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as long-term effects of things like that started, let's say, cropping up more and more, and as where, let's say, like in general, like fast internet is nice, but if it's, say, radioactive principles are, let's say, making the birds die or something of that nature,
right? Yeah,
you might kind of go, wow, you know what? Do I really need this program to download in like 3 seconds, or do I like to have, birds and bees and, things of that nature, or all like the buffalo ran off a cliff into a volcano because their brains get fried, or something like that. And so it just kind of keeps pushing forward and forward into what's becoming more and more of a dystopian kind of different blocks of areas being locked down into, different economic zones, and you can't leave and you're connected, but you can be connected. If you do the right thing, you can connect through, the internet and do things of that nature, but you can't leave. Right. And so as everything starts moving on to things like that, and you have the emergence of AI, which, and I think anyone can attest to this that lived before cell phones were a thing, that, you could remember, I don't know, at least, you could remember your childhood phone number, all 6 of your aunt's phone numbers and your grandma's phone number, and not just the emergency number, but the number right for the, the police station if it wasn't, an emergency, and you knew all your friends' numbers, or you just got on your bike and you rode to their house, right? But with the emergence of other technologies, and as people, let's say, give up their, let's say, memorable skills to machines, they start to lose those skills, right?
Are you talking about modern day right now, Seth?
I am talking about modern day right now.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, but just hold on. I'm setting up the history here. So just wait, okay? You said we make this up with our imaginations and movies and books, and this is kind of an accumulation of partly an imagination of mine. So some of this is how I see things for everybody. But then again, we're making stories here. So just we'll see how this goes. Okay?
No one ever said it had to be a happy story.
Okay, so with the emergence of all this, it becomes apparent that, let's say, AI, they're moving forward with AI, and that seems to be, let's say, quickly replacing humanity in anything that it has, let's say, ever been. And I think in general, the people kind of not necessarily like get up one morning and decide, okay, no, we're done with this. But, over an amount of time, and it accumulates to something, and it ends up where they just like say no. And for one reason or another, the society turns back to, I would say, simpler times. And I'm not saying caveman, but they get a real bad taste in their mouth for everything that keeps moving forward in a technological direction that a lot of people would just say, but no,
Seth, have you read the Dune series? It really seems like you've read the Dune series.
No, I did just get, which they aren't the main series, but I just did pick a bunch of them up at the book sale at the library the other day.
That's really makes me think of the Dune series. But
yeah, so I've heard, which it's probably a very good series, and I'm excited to read it. Is it on the audiobook server?
Yes, it is.
See, I thought I was just, I thought I was just getting old and just couldn't remember stuff very well. But it's tech that's frying my brain.
Yeah.
You see,
it's like the adage of you use it or you lose it.
Yeah.
And well, it's kind of apparent you use a calculator. I remember when I left home and I got a job and I worked somewhere and I was at the cashier position as they'd switch you around to different things. I worked at a Little Caesars. And so when I wasn't making pizzas, I was running the till, right? And so I would do everybody's change in my head and, give them the change. And someone caught that I was doing that. And I pretty much got rid up for not using their computer system. And so I have thought, okay, whatever, I'll just, I don't want to get in trouble. I'll just use the number that they say on their screen and I'll do that then, which it was always the right number because I did the math right. And within, I don't know, it was a couple months, I found that I couldn't just quickly add numbers up in my head.
Oh, because you were forced to use their system?
Yeah, I was forced to just, okay, they gave me a 20, I hit 20, and it just says, okay, you give them 325 back. Okay, here's 325. And so you just look at the screen, it says, okay, give them this amount. And so then I just got in the habit of not running the math through my head.
Yeah.
And within, I don't know, it was a couple weeks to a month, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's okay. Let me think about here. And then I have to visualize and go, okay, this, and then that minus that. And then that. So yeah, if you stop using something, in the practice of it, you'll lose it. So anyways, to try to move on with the history here, where was I at? So
they kind of rebelled against it, and
they kind of rebel against this either passively. Some of this is not exactly important unless we want to go back and make it important, because it's kind of where some of it's coming up to. And so kind of like what we would see the Amish, right? So the society in general kind of takes a step back, and either maybe there was some, violent uprisings of, people just saying, well, there's, 20 of you that want us all to get this chip implanted in our brain so you can, stick us with cyanide in the capsule if we leave our designated zone. Maybe we're just not going to do that and buy your product, and you just, lose importance, or, maybe there was a violent uprising, whatever it was. The society restructured itself in kind of a Amish direction, where it's kind of like anything before this certain point is a big no-no, and they won't have it around like 1699 or whatever it is. Not all of them do. Some of them have a telephone, but it's like somewhere in town, and so you have to like really go out of your way to use it.
Right.
So some of it's not all like the way we imagine it to be, but the fact is that they take more of an active role in saying, okay, well, we might have a telephone, but it's like very limited and it's out in the barn. And so to use or access some of it, it's very, I'd say limited or controlled. But basically that's how they reset their society back up with the fresh installment in their mind that a lot of this was leading to a place that wasn't good.
You should really read the Dune books because there's a lot of Frank Herbert, the guy who wrote them, didn't like nepotism, right? Generational empires. He also didn't like Messiah figures. And I think his kind of ideology, if I can say what his ideology was a lot of the themes in the book were you had to basically go so far into basically the only way to teach humanity that to not stagnate, to not sort of trust machines for everything, to not trust a messiah or something like that for everything, was to basically give them something so incredibly cruel that held that messiah position, and teach them how terrible it is if you put all of your eggs in one basket. And that's like the only way. I don't necessarily believe that, but I think it'd be a really crazy world where just a bunch of people decided, no, we're not going to do this anymore. I think that's a little bit optimistic. I don't know if enough people would say we're going to not do the thing that we want to do anymore. You know what I mean? I'm not saying you need to change it, but what crazy thing happened that made them decide? Because it would have to be pretty crazy.
Well, so like some of these, like a whole generation of kids were growing up with fried brains, and these things were not just whispered about as conspiracy theories, but actually happening.
Yeah. So again, I'm creating a history. It doesn't have to be our world. I'm just creating a partial history based on an imaginative idea, because it's not quite done yet. I'll try to finish up what ends up happening here. So all this takes place. Humanity in general, in one form or another, basically outs more or less the tech directional that the world was going, and more or less in mass reverts back to, let's say, a quote unquote simpler time, right? Which in their benefit, as let's say AI on some factors take over, let's say anyone that didn't go along with this, are you really human if you've stuck a bunch of computers in you?
That's a great question.
So I'd like to say in this world, there might have been some things that residually hung around, but then again, the way that it's going is everything gets locked up in your certain zones. You can't leave, right. And then let's say less and less. But then again, if these people have no one that they have power over, they're living in an empty shell, and they eventually just kind of turn off, lose power. They just kind of peter out, especially if the rest of the world at large doesn't go along with it. And then what happens is, because now I would say wherever we're taking place is a couple thousand years later,
right?
And it's the society you have is like basically as we would see it now would be like an entire like Amish society where they might have like, let's say some like few things but they're very, say, limited. They're not, so sure they might have, let's say, combustion engines and cars, but like no one, it's like a big thing, and it's almost realistic because this is a couple thousand years later, And what they've actually done is they've taken like the main figurehead that kind of pushed this movement. His name sounds a little different. I didn't come up with a name for him. I was starting to think of one, but and basically what they've restructured is this guy is like this god figure, and he wrote, they have kind of this collection of his writings on, the proper way to live and how to, keep, let's say, tech from overtaking humanity and removing. And so all of society is based on this, because that's the thing with the Amish is I think they're technically like Mennonites.
I have no idea.
But I think deep down, that is what they are. They're technically like Mennonite, but they have their own like structure, and it's like they're their own thing. Like deep down and like other things. Like I've not gotten into it completely, but it's its own thing, right? To some extent, and so that's kind of what you have is this world or society is. Like the religious hierarchy of this society is like basically like inquisitor type people that, go around and make sure that, say, certain tech or science doesn't progress past a certain point. So they might have, let's say, different medicines, different things that might match and be like, okay, this is something you can study, but it never into anything that takes over, say, the body's, say, natural immunity or like genetically modified stuff. So in a sense, like the religious hierarchy of this society is all based on the old writings of like all Uten, the guy that, wrote this all down and had this is the way to live.
Okay.
Yeah. All Newton. Okay. Basically in our time, maybe his name was like Paul Newton. But now they call him by this other name as it's, they've removed the P and, different letters as things change. And this is kind of, that is, the great prophet of, truth in this world.
Okay.
And that's kind of I would say probably as far as how things are, it's probably like pre-World War II.
Yeah. Well,
a little bit.
It would definitely have to be if you're going to restrict most types of technology. So the question, you said 2,000 years.
Wow.
That's a long time.
Right. Like I said, it would be something that took place, but then what ended up, that's where let's say the religious direction is now all funneled through basically what would be now like someone's philosophical ideas.
This guy who's been dead for 2,000 years.
Right. But of course, this was his writings, and this is the thing, and this is what's kept us safe from, losing our humanity to, like the tech demons or whatever it is. However, they've interpolated after so much time.
I think so. Since this is so incredibly similar to many interesting aspects of Dune, I'm gonna say that they would have to, they can have like really advanced technology, just none of it has any kind of artificial intelligence interface. It's like when we launched up to the moon, like we didn't have advanced plotting computers. People did that. Like wrote all that stuff down.
And it's amazing how fast it happened. When I started out, I was an engineering student, and then changed major. I was a history major for a couple of years. So 4 years of college are going by, and I'm not having a degree. So I entered the School of Architecture. Well, I had to take an engineering course. I had to take a structures course, and I was doing the math for this test, and I was using a slide rule. Yeah. And the teaching assistant said, I haven't seen one of those. I haven't used a slide rule in years, and it's like, I was a little bit handicapped because I had to pull out the slide and figure out the arcsecant and whatnot and all that. instead of just hitting the button on a computer or on a calculator.
Right. Exactly. So my thoughts is that one of the byproducts of this is the development of what in the Dune universe would be called a mentat, right? Basically a person who has been trained since like 6 years old or so, to basically to structure their brain in cause and effect reasoning, so that they can basically retain vast quantities of information, and so that they can apply pure logic or pure calculation to a situation, basically turning themselves into human computers. Maybe in an attempt to attain the same sort of output that people used to be able to attain with computers, but now it's kosher. I'm using that word only because you were mentioned religious style stuff. It's kosher in society to use these kind of human computers because they are in fact human. No extra augment has been done to them in order to create, extra results. They're not connected to a mainframe. They are kind of doing this work themselves in their own mind. So they can still kind of keep track of large quantities of information, do really complex mathematical calculations, while still sort of retaining just like a human's level of life. Does that make sense, Seth?
It makes sense.
Yeah, and like I'm figuring they've got tractors, and in a couple of thousand years they probably made them really good.
Right.
But
it's not to say that technology can't increase in quality. And Seth, you're not saying Amish in the level of like no technology, because the tech that the Amish do use, like their buggies were like, space age tech when they came out. So it's like mostly it's the augmentation of a human or the increased thinking capacity of a human. Is that mostly what you're saying? That's like kind of outlawed?
Yes. Right. That would be one of the main things, as something that would remove humanity or the use and capability of humanity for like natural human process.
Right.
Because that is one of the things with the Amish. It's not that they don't have some of those things. It's just that in a lot of cases, they've looked at like a long-term idea, like with cell phones. Well, why don't the Amish have cell phones? Well, because they look at the long-term effects on how that affects family life, the, let's say, health of the individual. And they go, well, you know what? We aren't going to have this. Well, then some of that comes back to then going, okay, if we don't want to be enslaved to the banks, well, then we won't get a bank account. If we don't want to be enslaved to the power company, then, you disconnect power, right? And so if you don't want that, and that's all a lot of it is being very picky and choosy about the long-term effects it's going to have on you as your society and your family and such things.
Right. So people
and then
know what happened 2,000 years ago, right? It's not kind of like covered in mystery.
I'd say it's covered in some mystery, of course, because after years and years, you have...
I suppose 2,000 is enough for it to be kind of crazy.
So it's the idea. It was that the wicked people, these, I don't know, however they want to be, if they want to get, let's say, spiritual, and it was like the demons took a hold and they wanted to remove humanity by cutting out our brains and making us robots, and I don't know, and it like could be described differently. But right. I think that with the way that it's held tightly at this point, the idea of what was going on was quite prevalent. And so it's kind of held to like, well, sure, do I want a more efficient, motor on my tractor to make it more powerful and with less fuel? Well, sure, right? that's going to, but then they'll turn around and ask like, okay, well, is it going to have like an unguarded nuclear reactor in it that's going to give me cancer in 3 years if I use the tractor, right? Because I know a lot of, because it was a concern, and because I'm this way, I can't wear a watch. I'll kill a watch if I wear it, and some other electronics.
Yeah.
And so that was a thing. Some other people like that. It's like surge protection, right? So like when they first came out with electricity, they might not have really understood what, a surge protection was, and until, a lightning storm or, something. Well, now let's say more cell phones and different, let's say, electronic devices are now, quote unquote, surge protected, right? They're going to be shielded from some of the smaller electronic surges that they might encounter that might damage their things. Where before, like you had some of these that, were just emitting like pure, because I've seen it where, some of the old cell phones, and you can take and like pop popcorn in between it if you like do a call,
dude,
like stuff like that. So it's just, and then, and all like the MRIs and stuff, even modern cell phones, the amount of like radiation and like electrical, like just, it's like the idea that anyone's probably heard this, like, oh, they must have grown up under a power line, right? Well, like it's a thing, because the emissions or whatever, not emissions like, like car emissions, but the emissions coming off of the electrical field of the power line it'll give you migraines. It'll disrupt the electric flow of your own body, different MRIs and stuff. Like, so your cell phone is going to emit a certain amount. And like they've done MRIs where like if it's up against your head, it'll have like a massive amount of more like heat. Like, I don't know if it's like photons or whatever. I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's like extremely damaging to have that phone hooked up. That's why then a lot of people started getting like, the Bluetooth or like the headphone headpieces.
Yeah.
Was so that the phones wouldn't be right up against their head. And for adults, their skulls are,
supposed to be
thick enough to keep some of that. But for as bad as it is for us, it's even worse if you have it plugged into the wall and have it. It like doubles in some cases. So,
gotcha.
Like looking at some stuff like that, you'd be like, okay, well, having this cell phone is nice, but like if I don't really need it attached to my hip all the time, I can still go to like a landline and call someone, right? Or if they figure out how to like directly have it through like a satellite system. I don't know what the actual things of this. This would be the answer, but so that it's not, let's say, it's bouncing up to a satellite and bouncing back down to exactly where you want it to be, rather than being pushed through the atmosphere,
frying the airwaves,
frying everything in between it. Yeah. So I think
this is just
any tech that they have is like put through a high filter of what's the long-term residual effects. Just because we can, should we? That's really the point, I think.
So would you say that this is like, because it sounds like, not to be rude or anything, but it sounds like this is kind of like an ideal civilization for you.
So yes and no, but I don't really want it to be ideal. Like I was saying, what you have instead now is, all these years ago, they trade off one, say, overarching, tech elite that are pushing forward their agenda.
Yeah. Only
for now you have this religious kind of organization that, like, they can, they come and they inspect your home to make sure that, let's say you don't have any tech, and you don't have, not like tech in general, but that you haven't. It's like taking that, but now after all these years, like the fear of one thing, and it might have played out well enough at first, but now what you have is you just have, whoever's in power of controlling what you can and can't have now. It kind of makes the same thing.
That's typically how those things work.
It's an imaginative idea of like an ideal idea from my perspective. I'd love it if people adopted this idea. But again, if you take that and, take an entire generation or several generations of people, strictly holding to something like that, they'll need to develop, I would think, more of a reason. Well, why? Well, because Grandpa's, generation, kicked out all the, the Terminator robots. Oh, okay, yeah, but I didn't see any Terminator robots. Why can't we, have a calculator, right? And so I think over the amount of time to hold to something that stringently and important, it'll have to find itself in a religious reasoning.
But many years ago in the 80s, I met a guy, lived up North Shore area, and he had a really cool house. Was like a barn, but so you come in, there was a lot of open space, but he was wood heated and was well insulated and everything. It was cool. But his profession, he was a logger. He was a lumberjack, and he had these huge horses, and he took contracts on government land where, especially in parks and in preserve areas where there's some old growth timber that needed to be harvested, like it was going to, use it or lose it, it was going to die. But they were in restricted areas, so no machines could go in there, and he could harvest these trees and then drag the logs out with his horses. And anyway, he had kind of a little niche for himself. He had himself set up so he could, he could do this and, work with the lumber companies and stuff. And he would go into the place, and there was permits involved, and he would just take his horses in and haul out the lumber. It was kind of cool.
Is that your random insert?
No.
Okay.
That's just somebody great. I knew.
Okay.
So anyways, yeah. So I'll wrap that up as far as the history goes. So it's not to make a Seth's ideal perfect society. That's not my ideal perfect society. It's just based on a slight idea that would be like, wow, this would be nice if people just decided, wait, maybe just the idea of maybe just because we can, should we?
Right.
Thinking more on like long-term residual effects. But anyway, so it's not to make a perfect society because you have, basically the same, say, things resurfacing just from a different perspective. Now, who's ever basically, the anti-tech pope, nothing against, no, anyways, the anti-tech pope or whatever it would be, right, gets to decide, wink, wink, my cousin is, the owner of, this other motor company, let's say Ford. And so now I've just decided that it's against the rules to own Ferraris. I don't know.
Yeah, no.
Right.
But that's kind of how society works, though. Everything degrades.
Right. And that's my point. So whatever they have now, you have this other thing, but the driving force is now almost like a whole like world-reaching religious system that is based on like not having quote unquote technology. Maybe not quite to the point that, let's say, or the idea of being Amish, but it's the same stuff.
Right. Here's what I'm thinking is happening. That's what's happening on the public sphere. What's happening on the private sphere is that people are trying their hardest to stay within the rules laid down, but what they're also trying to do is remove the brain from a human being and integrate it into a machine so that they can A, continue to follow the rules of technology, but B, somehow augment it. Like the discussion is up right on the airwaves, how if a human, what makes a human a human? How much do you have to take away in order for them not to be human anymore? Like so there's this scientist, right, who developed these like giant mech suits, and he grew artificial muscles. This isn't real. I'm saying this is theoretical for the story. He grew artificial muscles because they were the best.
Yeah.
And some people hated him for it because they said he was corrupting the picture. Some people said it was the best, and now That's what everyone uses in warfare, are these weird things with these artificial, it's robotic, but it's got these like long, spindly legs that use muscle, and they have artificial blood, and they have to like process material in order to feed it, to like give it oxygen, So the discussion is up, what creates a human? So now people are trying to artificially develop things that aren't quote unquote human that are really powerful, and they have been able to develop like this suit. They've been able to develop like, you strap it on and it's like a pair of arms that are like 5 feet long. Each arm is like 5 feet long, and so you get like this insane power, and it's like, it's not actually attached to you because it's just a backpack, they say. But that's how it kind of works, is you create rules and then people immediately begin skirting around them as much as possible.
How to stretch the limits.
Right. So these mentat like human computers, they do copious amounts of drugs, right, in order to speed up their minds, right? And they type on these huge circular keyboards where they can just spin around and type incredibly quickly, right, in order to compute these complex systems. It's so crazy to me to try and think about a world where they don't allow for like render power, of like CPU render power, in order to figure out a complex mathematical or scientific problem. So what they literally had to do was just make human beings who could think bigger. So they just spent hundreds of years developing ways to make human beings so that they could think as fast as the computers could. Maybe they still have an old mainframe, right, left over that has an artificial intelligence on it, right, that basically they're trying to develop. They'll say that they've gotten there once one of these human computers can sit down and can interface and talk with this machine and beat it at its own game, And so far, we've gotten, 2/3 of the way there. And they're just kind of waiting for that genetic, have you noticed every single Olympics records are broken? And it happens at every single Olympics. Every single Olympics, even though the year before was the craziest and most advanced human athleticism we've ever seen. The season before, so the last Summer Olympics, we saw the fastest swimmers we had ever seen recorded. And then the next year, we have the fastest recorded swimmers we have ever seen. That is the power of human evolution, really, of our ability to kind of push forward and accomplish things. So I see this world that's just kind of broken in a lot of ways because of the kind of stringent rules they put on, but then the skirting of those rules have led off into these crazy avenues.
Just huge advantages. Instead of human abilities atrophying, they're becoming more focused and actually increasing. That's kind of cool.
And specializing. There's a tribe that lives, I don't remember, I think it's the Pacific Islands. They live on boats and on the water. They spend 90% of their day in the water, right? They've actually developed, their bodies don't retain the carbon dioxide that you breathe out? Carbon monoxide?
Carbon dioxide that you breathe out, yeah.
Yeah, they don't retain that as much. And what they do retain, their bodies can deal with. It's like a thing. Because they literally dive and forage for food underwater.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not just fish. It's like you'd go out and pick dandelion stems for a salad. That's the kind of things they do underwater.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw something on that the other day. That was pretty cool.
So that's kind of the world I see, is they have these crazy advances and they're technologically really advanced, but they rely on they have not given over any sort of any computing power to technology, and they refuse to let their bodies be tainted with any quote unquote augmentation, even though there is some definite augmentation that does happen. It's like maybe there was a big debate at some point. It's like, well, if a person breaks their leg, do we put bolts? If you're gonna get a hip replacement, do we do artificial hips, or is that augmentation? And it's like, well, and then a cleric or a bishop would have to come with special dispensation about, it's okay to wrap a sprained ankle. It's okay to wrap it up. You're not augmenting the body at all. You are just, supporting the body. So what's supporting the body? So like that's the thing, is that as things move along, things get changed and kind of messed up. Not messed up, but definitely not what they were at the beginning, where at the beginning it was a clear effort to escape the destruction caused by, the electrical interference and all the systems that are come in by offloading knowledge to the internet. But this is just a beast with a different name,
Yeah.
So introducing the hero, his name is Wilson. And he is 28 years old. He tested early at 5 years old for acute cognitive order. Basically, how they explained it to his parents anyways, is that in his mind, all information is separate from all other information. Basically, he is an absolute prime target, prime example of what they would want out of a computing specimen, right? He is able to separate all information that comes into him, and recall. He has perfect recall, so he can recall anything he sees, and it is separate. How he explains it when people ask, or when people used to ask, is all I have to do is close my eyes or sort of look back, and it's like a white table, right? There's just a white table in front of me, and everything I've ever encountered is sitting on that table, and I just pick it up and I can look at it in full detail. So he looks at a book, just kind of thumbs through a book. Anytime he can just close his eyes or think back and just open it up, and preliminary tests with the enhancement drugs came back beautifully. He was able to access them. Basically, how it worked is it worked like a time dilation thing, but more so it was a cognitive enhancement thing. Is you would take the drug and then he could look up, but it would take 1/10 of the time to look something up as it would without it. So he could basically look up 10 times more content. The first sort of looks through on as far as capacity, because a lot of times people are tapped out in certain capacities, was, he was young when the test was done, so it was unlimited, which is typically what they give like 5 and 10-year-olds is the unlimited tag, and it's typically not achieved to figure out exactly what his limit is until they're at least 15 years old. Then they kind of know what his limit is, and then they can basically ship them off into a specialization. What is he going to be working on? Is he going to be working on navigation? Is he going to be working on, mathematical equations for rocket launches? Is he going to be working on, financial information? What is he going to be working on? But Wilson's was never pushed past. He was never tested because he never made it to 15. When he was 10 years old, there was a break-in at his house, and there was some violent exchange between the thieves, and his parents were killed in front of him, and he basically went to sleep for like 6 or 8 months. He went back and looked at all of the things that he had looked at. He described it as he was forced to look at every single thing from the beginning of when he could remember, which was 6 weeks old, to the moment that his parents were killed in front of him. And he was forced to look at all of that over and over and over and over again. And they kept him alive in kind of like a coma state in order to, because he showed such great potential. But when he came out, he very quickly displayed the fact that he wasn't going to be able to sort of live up to all the things that they had kind of. There's like a couple of key doctors who really had a lot of ideas about how they could utilize his unique abilities, but he wasn't going to live up to it. One of the reasons, the repetitive motion of reviewing kind of solidified that in his mind. So he has a very tenuous control. He has very tenuous ability now to remember anything past that night. It was like a what's it called? Like a defense mechanism. Basically, his brain said, I don't want to remember this. Think about someone who could remember everything in every single detail, having to relive his parents being killed in front of him. His brain, his psyche basically said no, and is now constantly excising memories. So he has a very bad short-term memory. He can, if he focuses, if he sort of meditates, he can take a thing that's happening and he can physically, it feels like physical to him, move it onto that table. But when I say he has a very bad short-term memory, he has a very good short-term memory. It's just very short-term. And he has to basically choose to move things into long-term memory. So he's just been kind of living on the government's dole for a couple of years. Since he was, he woke up 15, 16. There was a couple of years of testing. He's 28 now. So that was like another 13 years. And he's undisciplined, fat. He has nightmares every night. He found out that he could physically remove memories. He could take them off the table. But he can't bring himself to remove the ones of his parents. And he feels like that would probably be it. If he removed them, then he'd probably get over whatever this hump was. But, indecision leads to laziness, which leads to indecision, which leads to procrastination. All of those terrible cycles have just kind of has just kind of taught him over these last 13 years, coping with your problems in this way, So he lives his life in a pretty simple routine, not really venturing out much. He gets a check from the government, there's still a couple of long-term tests that they're doing on him to see, but most of the doctors and most of the officials and most of the fanfare is gone, and so he's just kind of a number now of once maybe was going to be was going to be a star, but now is not a star. So I don't know how he becomes the hero.
Well,
but
I think that's probably why we have random inserts.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, Wilson, he decided he needed to get out more, and there was an approved activity of he started trying to get in a little bit better shape. He got a mountain bike, and he decided to go off on a mountain biking kind of camping trip. Just to get to some wilderness, and he brought along his good supplies of the dehydrated food and everything, because you got to pack light on those. And so he went off, and there was an area where they had some trails and stuff. It was kind of Pacific Northwest, so it was mountainous and forested and all this, and he decides to go off trail because he just in for a penny, in for a pound. So he starts off on this trek, and the first day goes great, and he's exhausted, and he sets up camp, and he eats and sleeps and gets up at first light and heads out and going along, and he hits he's going a little bit too fast, and like he's off the trail system, so it's pretty rugged.
Right.
And he slips and then skids off kind of an escarpment and ends up like, he would have died because it was a big drop, but he it was through a stand of like this Sitka spruce, and he was able to, branches breaking his fall.
Right.
But he was banged up pretty good. And worse, he was like way off the trail. And this is like miles from any like road or anything. And here he is kind of all broken up. And what we have is a Bigfoot rescue mission. He gets found by Sasquatch and brings him, kind of makes kind of a litter and drags him to this camp. And, his family is there. There's 6 of them. And the old woman, binds up his wounds. There's a couple of broken limbs, just binds up his wounds and nurses him back to health. And he kind of comes to himself, and he realizes he's in a real strange situation. And what's more, there's something that seems off by these creatures that are caring for him. And he can't quite put his finger on it, but they seem to be like there and not there. And he stays with them because it takes quite a while for him to get well enough so that he can travel. And they explain that they come here from a different phase. And the reason they seem odd is they're out of phase. And so that it's hard for Wilson to nail down when he'll look right at them, and they seem to kind of blur out. And they say they stay away from humans, but they like to come to this phase for the wilderness experience and the hunting and the other things, and then they can just phase back into their own dimension. And
wait, so your random insert is literally just Bigfoot?
It's Bigfoot. But the thing of it is that the constant interaction with this, they had to like phase him into their dimension to get some of the materials and stuff to patch him up. It opened up pathways for him to manage these hard memories, and basically reignited his capacity to access his cognitive abilities. However, it's problematic because how does he explain, Bigfoot saved me, so he's got himself a real public relations problem, especially since, you can look all day for a Bigfoot and they're just not there.
Yeah. Cool.
I couldn't resist. It was just too good a chance.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait, It Gets Better. We will be back next week, I believe, with a continuation of whatever this story is. If you would like to ask us to maybe, if you have like a cool idea you want us to use, at me on Twitter at @GetsBettercast, or send me an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. If you like these episodes, thanks. Share it with a friend. Share it with an enemy. Share it with a best friend. Share it with your best enemy, your arch nemesis. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. And until then, just wait, because it gets better.